Order. Let's see, Sean, could you establish quorum for us, please?
Commissioner Adams
Here.
Commissioner Bartlett,
Here.
Chair Len,
Here.
Commissioner Coe, Vice Chair Payne.
Yes. Have a quorum. Right, busy agenda, but the good news is we have apricots for dessert, so so that'll be good. But at this time, we'd like to hear public comments for items that are not on the agenda. Of course, there'll be time for public comments with the items on the agenda later, but for now, we have one, Mr. Boehner. We'll go in 3 minutes, I believe.
Good evening, commissioners. I would stay longer, but Stan has been before, so I have a prior commitment. But I wanted to thank all of you for the efforts you have done and will continue to do to preserve the remaining structures in Los Altos that have historic and architectural significance. You're the only organization that can do that, so I really appreciate your effort. And I think it's interesting that tonight before you have 2 projects that span a range from homeowners looking to establish landmark status and Mills Act for their property, and another home where people are taking a creative approach to preserving a structure rather than tearing it down. I'm delighted to see both of those. I think it shows the spectrum of opportunities that people are exploring, and I hope that we can continue to make more opportunities and more means available for homeowners so that historic properties can be saved and preserved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Boehner. Do we have any other comments online?
If there are any parties who'd like to speak regarding an item not on the agenda, if you could please raise your hand if you are virtual on Zoom. And no parties have raised their hand.
Okay, so we will go ahead with our agenda here. There's nothing on the consent calendar. I see that just looks like a placeholder. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we're caught up with minutes.
No, the next meeting will have minutes.
Okay, I was wondering, but good. Okay, thank you for that. So our first item then is item number 1 regarding Milverton Road, 604 Milverton Road, and we will start with our staff report.
Good evening, Chair Lang and Commissioners. My name is Sean Gallego, Senior Planner with the Planning Division. The item before you tonight at 604 Milverton is an application where the applicant is seeking advisory review for a new 2-story house with 5,414 square feet at the first story and 2,831 square feet at the second story, and the conversion of an existing historic house into a historic accessory building. The existing historic house and are located near the center of the property, and the house is close to the property line on the west side, and the garage is situated close to the property line on the east side. Subject property is located on lot 12 in the subdivision, and it is a historic home. The historic structure is accessed to be a private driveway that's between unit 720 and 730 Morningside. The historic structure, which is in yellow, is not visible from Morningside Road or from Milverton Road because it sits below the street level on a grade closer to Burley Creek. The proposed project includes a new 2-story house, which is in the light blue on the right side. And the conversion of the existing historic house into accessory structure. The historic house is placed at the upper portion of the screen in the salmon color. The site plan again depicts lot 12 with the existing house in light blue, proposed house in, or existing house in light salmon, proposed house in light blue. It's important to note, while not applicable for the historic commission, the conversion of the historic house into an accessory structure does align with the deed's restriction objective, which is to permit only one single family house on the property in the event of a creation of a new house. In council's original approval for the Morningside planning and development, there was a restriction that the site could only have one house. And per code, they could have an accessory structure or an ADU. And so in effect, they are converting the historic house into an accessory structure. It'll no longer be a single family home, which means it will remove its kitchen. And then the primary single family home will be the new house that's in blue. That is consistent with the Morningside planning and development that does allow one home and an accessory structure. The Costello House is a 1916 craftsman bungalow located at 604 Milverton Road. It is listed as historic resource on the historic resource inventory. It is a vernacular bungalow type of residence designed with elements of craftsman architectural style. This Costello House conforms to the traditions of craftsman style roof and massing, pitch, and proportion of the roof and gables, but does deviate as there's no beams, brackets, or knee braces. The ornamentation along the roof line is plain, gables are rounded. The carved apricot leaf motif at the central portion of the gable tops is a central display of the influence of the arts and crafts style of the craftsman home. The Costello House retains many elements of its original materials, including the wood clapboard siding, masonry chimney, window fenestrations, wood window frames, wood sills, and wood roof framing. Most of the wood elements were made of redwood, and the intersecting gable roofs are original. The central gable roof has two boat gables on each side with curved barge boards and open eaves. The original group windows of 3 on the front facade fenestration, wood frames, and wood sills have been left intact and are original to the building. The proposed new house is located on the northeast corner of lot 12, with its front facade directly along the frontage of Milverton and the entrance of the Morningside planning and development. The new 2-story house is a contemporary style house with rectangular forms and simple massing and details. The staff lease relates well to the low scale design of the existing historic house. The project has low slip roof forms, which are consistent with roof forms found in the neighborhood. Project proposes uses more eclectic and form than those found in the surrounding neighborhood and different than the existing house. But staff does believe that the design is consistent and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. The detailing and materials of the structure reflect a high level of quality and appropriate relationship to the rustic qualities of the area. The proposed building materials, which include clay tile roof, stucco, stone siding, wood clad windows and front door, wood garage doors, wood trim details, are integral to the design. And overall, the design incorporates a contemporary style with simple elements and quality materials. The staff believes are thoughtful and integral to the design. The staff knows that the staff report does include the materials board for the proposed new buildings. I should go back. So as you probably are aware, the upper portion of the slide is the front facade that'll be facing the frontage. The lower one is the left side of the building, which has a below grade garage, which the garage entry will not be visible on site. The upper portion is the rear elevation, and then the lower elevation is the right side of the structure. In evaluating whether this structure may affect the historic integrity and significance of the historic building that exists on the site, we are required to look for, it is recommended that we look at the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic structures. Within the staff report, the staff did provide responses to each of the Secretary of the Interior standards. That we do believe complies with the standards themselves and does not create a significant effect or impact to the historic building that would degrade or result in it being removed potentially from the historic resource inventory. With regard to advisory review, the I don't know why it says that, I'm sorry. The Historic Commission shall make the following findings: that the project complies with the provisions of the Historic Preservation Ordinance, chapter 12.44. Project does not adversely affect the physical integrity of the historic significance of the subject property. The second element of the finding, whether it adversely affects the physical integrity of historic significance. Again, staff's beliefs that the project's compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation will result in a project that does not adversely affect the integrity of the building. A recommendation, we recommend that the Historic Commission approve the requested historic advisory review application per the recommended finding and conditions of approval. Find the project is also categorically exempt per the staff report. Once the commission provides a recommendation, the project will be reviewed by the zoning administrator, and they will take final action on the historical advisory review permit. And then they will take action on the design review element of the application, which will be the design of the building in relation to the single family design guidelines for the city. The action today is a review whether this new building potentially degrades the historic significance and integrity of the historic building, which is now being converted to an accessory structure. As noted in the staff report, no exterior modifications are proposed to the historic structure, the Costello House, in this proposed project. This concludes staff's presentation, unless there are questions.
Good point. I have a few questions, but before I ask mine, I'll see if any of the other commissioners have questions, clarifying questions about the staff report.
Yes, are there any other ADUs on the historic register?
No, so this will be an accessory structure. It doesn't qualify for an ADU because it's too large. ADUs are limited to a maximum of 1,200. It is permitted to be an accessory structure because council, in its modification to the planning and development, permitted an accessory structure, permitted its conversion. And so although it may exceed the allowable conversion, the allowable area for an accessory structure of 800 square feet, council has ruled that it's permitted. So staff's position is that it's permissible, but there will be no ADU for this. No kitchen will be permitted.
Well, okay. I saw the language about ADUs here in the proposal. Confused on that. And the same.
And just to clarify the answer to that question, then we'll get to you. Which is, so when you say council has decided, whatever, you're referring to the thing they did on 9/24/2013.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
That's okay, good.
Yeah, I have the same question about, removing the kitchen. If the city is trying to make sure that we do have ADUs to help us keep our housing and increase the number of housing. Now I understand what you're saying is it has to be under 1,000 square feet to be considered as an ADU. Keeping it as a supporting structure, and if we had to keep the kitchen in it, wouldn't that also help out the city keep adding more housing?
So yes, but in council's action in 2013, there's a specific, in the minutes, there was a specific condition that was placed by one of the council members that was approved that stipulated that this could not be an ADU. So, and if we were to try to allow its conversion, it doesn't meet the standards for minimum size or maximum size. it exceeds the 800 square feet for accessory structures, but council in their action made a decision that they would support an accessory structure, but they clearly indicated that they would not allow an ADU at that time.
Okay.
Other questions?
I have,
Okay, good.
I'll speak a little bit on behalf of some of the emails that poured in from.
This just to be clear, we're asking questions now.
Correct. Okay. All right. My question is that, going back to the 2013 agreement, just to clarify, stipulation 5 says a new development shall appear to be single story and have no more than 6,000 square feet of lot coverage. So I'll have to assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that the 6,000 square feet is a footprint and not a total.
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
it's footprint.
So, so we found that, stipulation 5 of the 2013 agreement, the development, the plan, conforms to that when it's not in violation of that.
No, it's, I think that's where there's some discrepancy in some of the public comments is they may not, maybe they are, but maybe they weren't fully aware of the modification in 2013, which then stipulated the location of driveways, stipulated the lot coverage, and the applicant has built it to comply with that, and staff reviewed it multiple times to make sure it complies with it, and it does comply with these standards. The
Okay.
council set.
Just to clarify that process did take place.
Correct, yes. We, all of those requirements, including an evaluation of fire hazards was done. We have a report for that to be done because it's a requirement. So all of these conditions were met. And that'll also be reviewed specifically by the zoning administrator, since he has purview on the final action.
Okay, thank you.
Are we supposed to consider the removal of the kitchen in the accessory house, that process? Are we, as part of our advisory team, looking at that? Or is that something zoning does?
The question about the kitchen is a zoning related question that is for the zoning administrator. Per the findings that are stipulated in the, in the report, what you're looking at broadly is whether this new house affects the significance and the integrity of the historic Costello house.
So anything they plan to do with the accessory unit, we're not dealing with at this point.
No, you're looking at whether in most instances where we have these type of applications, usually we have a direct addition to the historic building and we don't have another unit being built. So the code is designed in that manner that we're looking at that. Now, in this particular case, each of them are separated by over 160 feet. With a whole series of other parameters that inhibit kind of viewing each of them. So staff believes that it doesn't have that effect. But that's for you to determine. Okay, do you agree?
I guess I ask you, my question mainly would be to ask you to elaborate on that, right? This project has a number of aspects. And so I was hoping perhaps you could say a few more words about sort of the focus of our jurisdiction as a commission. Clearly we're not a design review commission on the main house, for example. We generally don't deal with the interior of structures, mostly the exterior, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about the jurisdictional aspects of what we're looking at tonight versus what are left for the zoning administrator or other things.
So what the specific finding requires is that that the project has complied with all provisions of the historic preservation ordinance. And does not have an adverse effect on the physical integrity or significance of the building. So when we go back to. So we're looking at a historic structure, and whether it's affected, we're looking at the age. So this building is not going to have an effect on the age of the building. It meets the standard. We're going to be looking at integrity, and the historian for the site found that the existing house does retain integrity in regards to design, materials, workmanship, feeling. It doesn't retain its setting. Now, the setting, of course, is the original setting that existed with the home first built. Well, that has been diminished with the development of the Morningside development and all the other urban developments occurred in the surrounding area. But it does have sufficient elements to still meet that standard. The only way the commission could look at this is if the integrity in some way was affected. So if you believe that the design of the existing Casella house was affected by this. Staff believes it isn't. There isn't a direct connection between the two. If the materials were affected in some way, so if the kitchen remodel was modifying the exterior of the building, which it's not, or workmanship or feeling. Now, workmanship and feeling, if they're doing an addition, then that may be a factor, but they're not proposing that. And then the historical significance, the historian does again talk about that it continues to meet the standards for historical significance based on its architecture and architectural style. The conversion to an ADU or to an accessory structure does not impact the architecture of the building. In order to qualify, it has to meet either historic significance based on an event, a person, a setting or something. So right now it qualifies under both the time period when it was built and also for the architecture. And none of those are directly impacted by this accessory structure conversion. So you just be focused on it. Now, if you do believe that there is in some way a direct impact to the house to that, then you would be evaluating that element. Now, the second part of the finding is the project does not adversely affect the physical integrity or the historic significance. And staff kind of provided a statement of kind of evidence in the record, kind of explaining why we believe it still met the standard. We provided you the finding, and then we tried to provide a partial finding and then some basis, because in the finding, we're supposed to have a basis within the record.
Thank you for that. And just, I'll offer an answer to the earlier question about auxiliary structure. One that I recall was, I forget the exact address, but it's over towards Los Altos Avenue where the property owners wanted to preserve or have a barn on that property, just declared an historic resource. And we did go through with that. It wasn't the same thing where they were swapping which one was the residence or whatever, but we've done at least one.
Yeah, 210 Alta Vista.
That your memory's better than mine.
Yeah, the main house was not historic. It could have been, but they didn't want it to be. And then the barn was completely newly reconstructed, but retaining the original forms and structures.
That's at least one example. Good. Well, one last thing, if you will. There's this term of art that is thrown around, categorically exempt, which sounds very official. You perhaps say a few words for my benefit. Anybody else who's curious what exactly is meant by categorically exempt?
So the state of California, the legislature has created exemptions that if a project meets the specific category, then it's exempt from further environmental analysis unless there is a finding that there's significant effect in some manner. And the state law specifies those kind of elements. In this particular case, it qualifies under 15303, which is for new construction or for conversion of small houses. So if you're building a new home or you're converting a structure, it qualifies under that category. The only way it may not qualify is if there was like hazardous materials found on the site, but some other significant environmental effect that would require mitigation. Then if we knew that was happening, if they had on-site storage of materials that potentially had contamination on the site, then it would no longer qualify. That's not the case. We're not aware of any on-site contamination. The second element is under a CEQA, section 15331 allows that structures that comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation or restoration automatically qualify for exemption. So as long as we can show that it meets all of the specific requirements listed in the report, then it's automatically exempt. Unless there's evidence in the record that shows in some way we can't comply. which staff is not aware of any evidence in the record or known evidence.
And in the material, there is a detailed review against the Secretary of Interior
Yes.
standards. Okay, good. Any other questions? Thank you for all that. It's a lot going on there, but a little unusual case, so good to get on it.
I just have one more
Of course,
question,
please, go ahead.
and pardon my ignorance, sir. So if we go ahead and we say that we don't think this new building is compromising the historical nature of that, the accessory building, is the accessory building as it stands now qualified as a historic building, or does that have to be revisited to make this swap?
No, it will still be a historic resource. The
So that's-
significant, the designation is not affected.
Okay.
It just will be a historic structure. It won't be a historic house, but it'll still have the history of a house, and that'll still be reflected in the HRE, which we have, and it'll still be reflected in the Department of Park and Recreation form 523A and B that we attached to our records. It'll reflect the change that's happened over time, so it'll still be an acknowledgement of what it was and what it is today. Or will be in the future.
Good questions. Thank you, everybody, for making sure we understand what's going on. So at this point, we'll open it up to public comments. If anyone.
Chair Lang, did you want to allow the?
Oh, of course. Well, the maybe most important member of the public, people actually involved with the project. So if you'd like to say a few words, this would be a good time for that.
Thank you. I had a few pages to distribute, but it looks like Sean's already been on top of it, and it's basically the same thing as what you did.
Could you introduce yourself, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Mike Giovanato. I am the homeowner of 604 Milverton Road. So first of all, I'd like to thank staff. This project has had a lot of moving parts, and I'm really grateful for its efforts and the efforts of everybody here in planning storage. I'd like to show you something I found right next to the Costello Cottage.
Oh my goodness.
This is from 1919. And it was about 5 feet away from the home. And I think this is all that's left of the car. So I figured you guys would
That's a very nifty. Thanks.
members of the Los Altos Historic Committee and attendees, my name is Mike Giovanato. I'm the homeowner of 604 Milverton Road. I purchased a property approximately 10 years ago and have lived in the historic cottage ever since. Rather than going into details about my new home project, I'd like to speak about my enduring relationship with our community. I grew up nearby. I have fond memories as a child, Los Altos, that tie in with our community's heritage. As a kid, my parents would pack my brothers and I in an old Chevy Vega and drive down to Grant Road. There was a pay to pick apricot orchard with a little stand out there. And so my parents would stuff us all in the car with those Halloween orange plastic buckets and push us into the trees to pick the apricots. And I remember they had a large fig tree right next to the stand. And to me at that age, it looked like a mountain. And myself and my brothers would climb up there and pick fruit. After that, we would you could sulfur and dry them there on site. And we lived in an apartment down the street, so it was not a good idea to sulfur anything. But my dad did make those redwood drying trays, I recall as a kid, out on our little patio. And so that's what we used to dry the apricots, and I still have them, and they're right on site at the historic cottage. I still use them. Not long after that, my parents purchased a property in Los Altos known as Holly Village. It's 1473 Miramonte. This property has deep farming roots in our community. And it was, I think, the center of some large apricot orchard. And there's, I believe, 11 homes and cottages. We still have it in the family. There's like 11 homes and cottages on there, and an old pump house and a barn. And we have them as rentals. As a kid, we used to climb up into the barn, second story still in there. And it still has the old block and tackle. And we used to play and dare each other to run around and cause trouble and climb up to the top of the pump house and pick chestnuts. There's still a chestnut tree there. Walk through Permanente Creek, which borders the property, just like I have Adobe Creek bordering mine. So it's a really neat feeling. Of course, these memories are not unique to me alone, but in a manner more or less similar, common experiences back then to many of us who grew up here. I was introduced to the Costello family, the previous owners of my home, just before purchasing the property. Although at the time they did not have the property on the market, they did a few times in the past, and I don't know. They didn't have it on the market at the time. I met them on the property, and their concern with selling, at least what was presented to me, was that they were afraid that their generational family home and family history may be lost to time. The Costellos and I, when we met, our conversations immediately centered around the uniqueness of growing up in this area. We talked about gardening, picking apricots, of course, creek walking, and his dad's old tractor. Then he showed me the tree near the cottage that they planted when his father passed away by flipping his tractor. So every time I walk by that tree, I think of old man Costello, right? He also showed me where they buried the family dog, and there's still a little cross up there that's clearly made by a kid, and it's just so heartwarming. I gave my word to the Costellos that I would preserve their memories and their historic cottage. With these considerations in mind, I have been fortunate to work with my residential architect, Dino Garcia, and historic resource architect, Mike Garavaglia. And I shouldn't mess up his name because I'm Italian as well, but I think I did. Garavaglia Architecture has been in the forefront of historic preservation in California, including the Stanford Mansion in Sacramento. Beautiful structure, as well as Palo Alto History Museum. Regarding the construction of my new home, I'd like to quote a couple findings from the Secretary of Interior Standard Compliance Review Report produced by Mike Garavaglia that illustrate my compliance with the city covenants and restrictions for building my new home. Quote, the proposed exterior materials, stucco walls and stone cladding are similar and compatible with houses in the surrounding neighborhood. Another quote, the character defining features of the existing historic house, such as the building form and massing, fenestration, large board detailing, roof forms, wood siding, and the building's wooded creekside setting would not be affected by the proposed project. Of the 10, I'm a novice at this, so apologies here.
Doing great.
I think there's 10 different criteria or points on this as something form. The findings of Garavaglia, historic architect, coincide with staff's findings, and I meet all 10 in compliance. There wasn't even
shade of possible compliance, or I guess there's a scale. All 10 met them. I believe that report should be with you, and if not, it will be with you shortly. So now it's time to build my new house, start my own family. And it pleases me to know that this historic cottage is on my property. My kids too will have the connections to our community's past that I was lucky enough to have as a child here as well. I think this is the point of preservation, not just to preserve structures, but to pass the significance and experiences of that moment in time to our next generation, to bring it full circle. My commitment to the members of the Los Altos Historic Committee and audience is that I will continue to be a good steward of the historic Costello home and preserve this unique community resource for the coming generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Very good. And we do have that report, by the way. I reviewed it ahead of time.
Unfortunately, my architect is here on Zoom today.
Oh, okay.
So if you do have any questions to be directed, either he may respond, or I'm more well versed on what's going on.
Good thought about
I
it.
may be able to respond as well.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
See, let's see here, does any commissioners have questions about the property owners?
I love the property. It's,
You can kind of tell.
by the way, you're the apricot lady? There is a carved apricot that is right above the front door, and each day as I come home, you look up and it's right there. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any, I don't have any cards, I don't think. I don't have any comments here. Do we have any comments from the public online?
We have quite a few attendees. If there's a member of the public who'd like to speak on this specific item, 604 Milverton, if you will please raise your hand. I know we received quite a few letters, so I want to make sure no one's.
Yeah.
Again, if there's any member of the public who would like to speak, if you could please raise your hand and provide your comment. Let me double check. I'm gonna check the comments really quick to make sure there's no one.
Yeah, there were two letters in the. I'll get to them. Later. I see just a copy of that.
No. And then no. It does not appear we have anybody who would like to speak.
Okay. All right. The pandemic by now, probably should know how Zoom works. So anyway, at this point, I'll open it to discussion among commissioners. We'll start on this side this time if you have any.
I just have a question. Do we need to specifically address the three? Okay,
I mean, you're welcome to take them into account. I'll say that I do, this is part of the reason I have some of the jurisdictional questions, because I think
Right.
people may have concerns that are just not part of our jurisdiction, and that, you know, presumably they can eventually work with staff to figure out where they can share those as they will, but we don't have to go sort of letter by letter to respond.
yeah, I resonate a lot with what you mentioned, having been raised here. So, and I really appreciate understanding better exactly what our charge is here as the commission. And at this point, I don't see, I don't see how the construction of the new house can adversely or even at all affect what's going on with the historic structure. I think distance is a huge factor there, and my understanding is that you've taken care to reflect the design of that structure as well as the other surrounding structures in thinking about your new house. So,
We have two architects. One is a residential architect and the other is a historic architect.
right,
So we've done our best to balance is actually balance everything.
yeah, I drove by this, I drove by the site a couple days ago, and I was trying to envision, I was holding up the picture against the house, and my thought was that it would be a nice addition to that area, and very much tying the community together there, versus having just a deal.
I would hope.
I'm sorry.
I would hope.
Yeah,
At the same time, I like gardening. Plants, trees. So. I will do my best to,
and I think too, adding a home to Los Altos is a good thing. I mean, you need housing, and so
Yeah.
this is adding a house, and so I think that,
I would like to address one question one of council members had about why this is an accessory story rather than an ADU, which Sean answered perfectly. It was presented to me at one time. Should I choose to, during this process, convert it to a ADU? And I've been hesitant to do anything that is not to the letter of the conditions that in 2013 were established by council. I want to follow everything to the letter. And then build my home.
I think that this is a home run. I think, your team has done just a great job in, honoring the place and the history behind the place and, your story. You're gonna weave all those elements together and build a harmonious structure, a home for you, you and your children and your family. And God bless you. I mean, it's fantastic. I'm just so impressed by this.
It's wonderful. I mean, I grew up here. In my 20s, there was 4 or 5 years where I lived. I forget the name of the street, but it was 7/8 of an acre. And there were about a dozen apricot trees back there. And I would just pick apricots and put them out in front of the house for people to take. And folks are so wonderful. They'd return them back to me as apricot pies. So,
We'll come back to me, Commissioner Page.
I think what is gonna be going on with the property. Love the fact that you remember what the history of this area is. There's so many people that are coming to this area that thinks this town was only based off of being a high-tech city. It's like, no. We're an agricultural city. We need to remember that. So I appreciate what you're doing and keeping the house, the original house where it is, leaving it where it is, and keeping the history of what this area is about. Really appreciate that.
thank you. Thank you.
And my comment is that I think the issues with your development, really the historical aspect of it has been addressed. And it appears that the 2013 agreement is probably not in our purview to take a look at. So it's not our issue. And so go with Godspeed to address that with the city, the council, I guess. So, thank you very much.
So it's sort of an interesting coincidence. It's almost exactly 10 years ago that agreement was reached, but yeah, I echo many of the same comments here. I mean, to me, a key thing for people who have a history for or a passion for preserving the history associated with their property is they also have to like live with it. It's it's their home and so forth. And right. So again and again, the important thing from my point of view is that people are adapting to the life that they need to lead with their property, but making a really great effort to preserve the historical aspect of that. It seems, exemplary in that regard, and exactly the sort of thing that we should be supporting, and I think that's wonderful. I'll put a request out there, but I don't want you to answer it because it's not my support is not contingent on this. It's sort of a request and a suggestion, but you can just think about it. Which is the one thing I'll say is that it's a little bit unfortunate that you can't really see it from the road, right? And nobody would want to invade your privacy. It's your property. But there are programs to say, there's a gentleman associated with the History Museum, Gary Hedden, for example, who from time to time leads a bicycle tour around town and shares historical properties around. And it is a way of allowing, as you can imagine, people who are enthusiastic about history, the people who tend to sign up for that, for them to get a chance to see historical property, hear the kind of stories you're telling, and that sort of thing. As a special event, when then you can go back to enjoy your privacy. So a thought, just because I think you clearly have a passion for the storytelling as well as the structure, and it would be great if there's a way to share that. But I'll just put that out there. And
Couple quick things that are related. I have a brother who's getting married in 3 weeks, and he requested that the rehearsal dinner with all of bride's family, my family, be in the historical cottage. So for the past 3 weeks, I've been making sure everything is pretty nice detail. So there's going to be a lot of people passing through that cottage in a few weeks who are going to stand in the kitchen, look out the window and down into Adobe Creek, which runs all year. And I'm sure it's going to leave a good mark on them. And the other point is the city approached me I believe about a year ago regarding placing a bronze placard on my property. And I did accept it or say yes. I have not yet placed it up nor picked it up because I've been so concerned about doing anything on the property whatsoever during this entire process that any permutation got me a little apprehensive. But I do want you to know that the placard is here in the city and I do intend to put it up.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sensing a tremendous amount of controversy up here, so I'd be very open to hearing a motion about this. Would anybody like to make a motion? And if you need help with the wording, I imagine Sean can help.
I'd like to make a motion, but I need help with the wording.
So we have, you can turn it to motion. I move that the Historic Commission recommends approval under the recommendation section of your. Okay. I can let you. Sure.
So I recommend approval of a new 2-story house and the conversion of an existing historic house into a historic accessory building on a historic resource property, subject to the listed findings and conditions in regards to 604 Milverton Road.
Thank you. May I have a second?
I will happily second.
Okay. Sean, perhaps we take a roll call to make it quite official.
Commissioner Adams,
And I approve.
Commissioner Bartlett,
Approved.
Chair Lang,
Yes.
Commissioner Coe,
Approved.
Vice Chair Page.
Yes.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. as well. And
It's not my story, it's our story.
fair enough. And I hope the Costellos are somewhere enjoying that rehearsal dinner as well.
One of them wheel from the tree looking down and
Yeah.
I do still about once a year speak with one of the Costellos
Oh, wonderful.
and when that happens, it's a several hour conversation and I learn new things about the property and it's heartwarming.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay. That was fun.
That's great.
Okay, so with that, we should conclude it. We'll now move on to the next item, number 2 on our agenda, which is 41 Hawthorne Avenue, right around the corner here. And could we please have the staff report? Absolutely.
Good evening, Chair Lang, Commissioners. Again, my name is Sean Gallegos, Senior Planner for the Planning Division. Before you is a staff request that the applicants requesting for the property owners of 41 Hawthorne to pursue a Mills Act or a historic preservation agreement for the historic property at 41 Hawthorne Avenue. To provide a little background, the Mills Act is a tax incentive program established by the state of California, designed to promote and support the rehabilitation and restoration of historic structures in the state of California. Mills Act agreements outline specific terms and conditions, including a 10-year maintenance program that property owners must adhere to in exchange for a property tax incentive aimed at supporting the preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation of historically significant structures in the city. The agreement does require a reduction of property taxes in exchange for the continued preservation of the historic resource. Before you, I have the site plan for the site, its existing conditions. It is a historic resource on the city's historic resource inventory. It's located on Hawthorne Avenue between South San Antonio Road and Eleanor Avenue. This provides you the front facade of the historic home. Main house was designed in the Tudor Revival architectural style. It was built in 1922. So historic resource evaluation was completed. It is attached to the staff report. It did confirm that the historic resource with its Tudor Revival architecture style does retain all 7 aspects of integrity. Therefore, the existing house, due to still qualifying to be a historic property, is eligible for the Mills Act. For clarity, the city's regulations don't specify whether it needs to be a landmark or a resource. Either resource or landmarks qualify. It is found that the future proposed rehabilitation project meets the Secretary of the Interior standards. As part of the HRE, there was also a Secretary of the Interior standards report with potential for proposed future improvements to the building. Those, of course, will come back at a later date once they do propose changes, but they wanted to convey that proposed additions would be consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards in a manner that would still retain its integrity and significance as a historic resource. So as part of the allowed reduction in property taxes, which can vary between 46% in the assessed value of the property. There is a requirement that overall exterior modifications to rehabilitate the house must be consistent with its schedule of improvements. As part of the Mills Act, it's important to understand that historic houses will be maintained in exchange for the tax reduction. Overall, there are 3 types of construction estimates that were factored into this 10-year schedule, which included rehabilitation, remodeling, new construction, and overall maintenance. That's provided in the table and on the slide, and is also incorporated into the historic preservation agreement, which I attached to your report. It does, staff does believe that the maintenance program is appropriate for the proposed Mills Act program. Project historian Stacy DeShazo, as stated in attachment F, also found that the 10-year cost estimates are currently in line with the accepted cost estimates for the Mills Act. Based on the HRE, the standards review, and the requirements of the Mills Act program, project historian recommends that the house at 41 Hawthorne be authorized for the Mills Act. To provide a little background, we don't have a slide for it. To give a little bit clarity in regards to the reduction in taxes, which is maybe just a point of interest, I guess. As most owners are aware, property taxes are assessed on the purchase value of a property based on the assessed rate from the county. Mills Act properties are based on the average rental rate of the property divided by cap rate, which then results in a new assessed value. Staff does not, that the cap rate is established by the county assessor's office. We don't have access to that magical cap rate. But we do know, based on experience, that we see ranges of 40 to 60% reductions in overall assessed values, which results in significant reductions in property taxes. And that's what allows them to conduct a lot of these improvements on these older historic homes that require improvements to rehabilitate them. This would be, if approved or recommended for approval, this will need to go before the city council. We already have approved previously 15 Mills Act properties out of the hundreds that we have from the city. Staff does recommend that the Historic Commission recommend that the city council request the city manager to execute a Mills Act agreement with the property owners at 41 Hawthorne Avenue. This concludes staff's presentation.
Good. Any questions for staff about this project?
I don't understand, the ADU. Worth $1 million doesn't have anything to do with the historic structure. You know, how does that? I mean, it's just, it seems like it's. I don't understand why that's part of this process.
It's not part of the process, I think, and the applicant could speak to it. I think it was just an order of transparency.
Well, there wasn't any designation as to where it appears on the property either.
I think in the historic resource evaluation, there's a diagram where the ADU potentially would be. So when we spoke to the applicant in their previous of them submitting an application, we had given them kind of historical background and our experience with Mills Act applications. Traditionally, in the past, we've had examples where people have done improvements where they've done ADUs or additions to the historic homes, and then come forward to council and come forward to the Historical Commission to get approval for the Mills Act, and then we go forward to council. And there is a little misgiving from council to support something that's already been built, or to support rehabilitation when the home's already been rehabilitated. So they're asking after the fact. So staff recommends that applicants make proposals for their improvements so that council and the commissions are aware of the overall
I
plan.
understand you wouldn't want to have an ADU that you couldn't tell the difference between historic structure and the ADU. But there's no details about the ADU.
Correct. That would come in a future application. So an ADU, I should clarify. So an ADU under state law is not required. An ADU under state law is not required to come before, may not be required to come before the Historical Commission. It would be handled administratively by staff. Same thing, because it's intended to be an administrative process now, or ministerial process. It cannot have a discretionary review on them. So you may not be able to see an ADU. You'd be able to see any proposed additions to the main house, and they would be required to come back as an advisory review. and you would be the final acting body for that action.
So that that list of cost run for the modifications over the years that we that's just on that main house. Right.
Yes.
And it doesn't include either the destruction of the that shed or.
So it includes, for rehabilitation, they're proposing $263,000 in stucco repair, foundation, basement, window repairs, and roof repairs. They added another $189,000 for the front door, relocating the front door to its original location since it's been modified. And then the garage remodel replacement is $180,000, which typically new construction, unless it's an addition directly onto the main building, isn't included in the overall maintenance program. And then there is a proposal for repairs, annual cleaning of windows and gutters, which typically isn't always included, but maintenance, repairs, caulking is all considered applicable. And that's $10,000. Landscaping repairs and maintenance and tree trimming are not typically included unless the historian has acknowledged that the trees on the site were historic in nature and that they were tied to the original building in some way. And that was common with 220 University Avenue had historic trees on the site. And so the commission and council authorized, because it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to make them.
And so that is the subject of this request.
Right.
And so by mentioning the ADU and the destruction of the shed, that's kind of alerting council that this is something we plan to do in the future.
Correct. And at this meeting, if you believe, I mean, of course, you have the discretion if you don't agree with the schedule of improvements. You could support it, or you could make recommendations that they modify it, or if you believe that it's not appropriate. Now, and then they would have to go back and make those corrections and come back again so that we can go to council with a final maintenance program.
So Sean, maybe you could help clarify a little bit about this, which in terms of the financial aspect of that, because I understand that Mills Act doesn't work where you like submit receipts from Home Depot and get that knocked off your property tax. It's you put under Mills Act and the new property tax is computed based on that. And you are expected to submit plans and reports to show that you're living up to your agreement. But it's not expected to balance out to the penny every year kind of thing. Is it, or is there another way to understand the financial balance of the deal between the city and the property owner?
Well, I mean, it's common in most jurisdictions. I did an academic study on it in graduate school, and it's most, with the exception of very few cities, jurisdictions, very few do a detailed request of receipts and documents. There is an expectation per state law that there has to be a 5-year inspection. Every 5 years, there's to be an inspection. Now, how is that inspection? It's not been decided because staff's perspective is that we've been taking an informal approach where we've sent out mailers out to owners, requested for updated maintenance programs and asked for documentation, and we've received documentation. More formal approaches include us hiring a historical firm to do inspections and then evaluate whether they've done the work, request documentation, which is a much harsher approach. So we've been taking a more informal approach. For every 5 years, we request that information. And that's something we can work with the commission in developing that program better so that we can make sure that we're on top of our maintenance. A lot of our programs are not compliant, honestly. We have quite a few that are very old contracts that are from the 1990s or prior. The historic preservation agreement is a relatively new document from the last 10 years. So there may be an opportunity to either pursue updates to the contract or to request updated maintenance programs for older projects.
Question which would be, well, the shop house question. Would there be something in the contract that required that the property remains visible from the street or the sidewalk?
Yes, so there is a requirement that the site has to be visible. Doesn't require access, so they can't access the property. Now, what is visibility? 220 University is completely not visible except at the gates. That's typically sufficient. I mean, we've never approached someone who has not been compliant. If we did, we would ask for them to provide visibility.
And a question not about this project, but just a general question about the Mills Act. I know that on our website, we have a listing of the landmarks and the resources and two heritage trees. But I don't think there's any place there where the Mills Act properties are listed. Is that something that could be done?
Yeah, there's nothing that would prevent that from being done. I mean, it's all public information.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put that in as a request, which we can follow up in whatever way is appropriate, which it seems to me that as, I mean, I know you can go and track it down, but as long as we're listing the historical resources of the city, and particularly since the Mills Act properties are the ones that are getting a real financial benefit from essentially support from the other residents, it seems appropriate to list them in one place. So that would be a request to add that.
I don't think it's problematic to add to this. We traditionally not provided the DPRs because we've received feedback about concerns of privacy and other issues with the DPR forms, but they are available for the public to come and get copies if they're.
It might be, and since many of them are already landmarks, it might be simple as like an asterisk or something that says these are the Mills Act properties or whatever.
We could do that.
Yeah, but it does seem appropriate that as long as the public is essentially helping to support the 15, perhaps more Mills Act properties, that they should have a convenient way of finding out which ones those are. And then, well, that's all for questions. I have more to say, but that's the any other questions? We'd be delighted to hear from the property owner.
Definitely. I don't think I'm gonna do as justice as.
Do you have any license plates?
I guess probably I should have you over here. Thank you very much for having me today, and thanks, Sean, for helping me through several months of conversations on email and chats. Finally, we are here, and thank you, Commission, for taking our hearing today and hearing about Portland Hawthorne. For me, my wife and I, my daughter was 6 years old. We have just been in the Bay Area for 20 years. And for us, Los Altos is kind of like the pinnacle of where we wanted to be. And all of our special occasions, as my wife and I were dating, and as well as we got married, Los Altos was the place where we came to celebrate, to enjoy, and to feel special of those occasions. And once my daughter was born, we actually went to the shoe park constantly. That's where she had all her fun, her birthdays a little bit, and she had playground time and stuff like that. So for us, that's where the love and obsession of Los Altos happened to happen. And we kind of also wanted to get away from the city in some ways. I was previously in San Jose, and for us to come here and kind of like, as you guys probably know, Hawthorne Avenue, there's no streetlights, there's no walkways. Everything is like rural as it can be. Of course, my home is very close to the street and as well as the commercial buildings around it. But still, it gives like a homey feeling from where I came from as well. So that was one of the key parts of it, that we wanted to come into Los Altos. And over the years, we saved enough to kind of like, okay, let's at least make the down payment as such. And when we were looking at it during the pandemic, in 2022, we happened to see Portland Hawthorne. We actually met with the owners who were there for the last 20 years of this property as well. They explained to us, they walked us through, even before we committed to the home itself, they made us a special tour. We climbed into that, we looked around. they gave us a whole briefing of how the home is. In fact, sorry, I couldn't get the picture. There's a picture of this home with snow on the home and the car parked right beside it. So I was completely perplexed to see California having snow and or at least here in the Bay Area. So it was very, very surprising. But for us, when we also fell in love with how the architecture is, it's very unique, how it's tapered out in the roof and things. And then also when we go inside, there is fixtures there where there's a small telephone booth where you can pull down a lever that opens up a chair. You can sit down and actually have a phone to converse with. So those are features that you never see again. And for us, that felt like very special. And we want to make that as our home. So adding all of this, just the neighborhood and as well as the place that we fell in love with, we kind of felt, okay, why not, right? But of course, here we are talking about Mills Act because this does take some attention. And we are hoping that as long as the council approves the Mills Act, we can use that funds to actually maintain the home as well. So that's all I have.
Okay. Anytime before you go, any questions for the applicant? One question, how old's your daughter now?
She's 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bring her over to the museum to see the trains there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And the apricots. Okay, at this point, we'll see if there are any comments from the public. I don't see much public in the room. No comments. Any online, Sean?
If there's any member of the public who'd like to speak on the item, if you could please raise your hand. Again, if there's any member of the public who'd like to speak on the item, if you could please raise your hand so I can know which person is the speaker. I receive no emails. I'm just checking to see if there's not an error because we have 5 people or 3 people right now sitting.
People love historic commission meetings.
Yes. Chair Lang does not appear we have any members of the public who'd like to speak on that.
Okay, thank you very much. So at that point, we'll go to the commissioners and see what comments or thoughts they have to share. Maybe I'll start on this side this time. Okay.
I think somebody who wants to go with Mills Act on their property, more power to you. That's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy process to keep your home the way it originally was. So, more power to you on doing that. It's a great way to keep the historic life of the house there. So I'm thrilled that somebody is actually going for a Mills Act.
Another home run. Again, I thank you for, taking care, being the great custodian of the property. Obviously the long-term, your long-time residents that you bought from, they're comfortable and with you and your family and with, passing the property on to their next generation. And they felt it was in good hands, and so do I. So I appreciate it, and I'll gladly support the bills.
I'm really moved by the fact that we have someone who has lived here all their lives, and we have another person who's a relative newcomer, and yet our goals are the same, is to preserve Los Altos history. So I think that's awesome.
And our feelings are the same.
Yeah, it's very, and I have to admit, my grandmother's house in Burlingame was built with that style. Unfortunately, it did not survive. So I am very happy to see a house built in that Tudor style.
Please stop by anytime.
As surviving, and I think it'll be a wonderful as you keep it up and demonstrate the history of Los Altos. So,
Yeah, well, mostly same. I mean, I'm excited when people take this on. I really view that a big part of as a commission is help homeowners who take on these challenges advance with that. And so thank you for all of that. I'll say, I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised as you get towards council, there'll be some more questions about the ADU. So giving some thought to those answers probably is just good coaching there to make sure that goes as smoothly as it possibly can. Remember, it's a one-way door. If you read the fine print, I'm sure you have. There's no returning from the Land of Mills Act, right? So, you know, clearly you've thought about that. Good. I'll just say, just for fun, I was curious, what other Tudor revival properties or structures are famous in California, or at least around here? We have one on University, 431 University. That's Christy Crame's place. Adobe Creek Lodge up the hill, also good. But here's the one that I thought I'd share. Probably the most famous Tudor revival structure in California is the Playboy Mansion. So you and you Hefner clearly have similar tastes on at least houses. So, but I think your house will be much more wholesome than that. Something like that. But anyway, no, seriously, it is wonderful to see it taken on. Best of luck with it. Best of luck with the next steps of this. So again, not very much controversy, so I'd gladly entertain a motion.
I move that we recommend 41 Hawthorne for the given Mills Act status.
Thank you. We have a second.
Second it.
Please.
You could, just for clarity.
Yeah.
On the staff report, which I could pass along if we could use the language, because it's a recommendation for council for the city manager. Just very
Okay,
specific.
so could you say these magic words?
Thank you for the
click your heels.
I recommend approval to the city council to authorize the city manager to execute a Mills Act agreement with the property owners for 41 Hawthorne.
And I assume you're still willing to second it?
I second it.
Okay. Could you please take a roll call vote? Sure.
May I get the second? Sorry.
Commissioner Page. Second.
Commissioner Adams.
Aye.
Commissioner Bartlett,
Aye.
Chair Lang,
Yes.
Commissioner Coe.
Aye.
Vice Chair Page.
Aye.
Good luck. All right. So now we get dessert. We have apricots for dessert, which is great. So at this time, we have an informational item from Dr. Jane Packard, who is the Los Altos History Museum Orchard Commons Committee Chair. But I'll go further than that, also say leader of taking all this on. And while some of it's just getting started, it seems like a great time to get an update and some thoughts going forward. So Dr. Packard, if you could go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, esteemed commissioners and staff, for the invitation to share some information with you today about a new collaboration between the city and the Los Altos History Museum. So as Commissioner Lang mentioned, my name is Jane Packard and I'm the chair of the Orchard Commons Committee. Next slide, please. So this presentation is an adaptation of the presentation that we gave to City Council as a study session in which they approved a contract between the city and the Los Altos History Museum for the maintenance and restoration of this landmark, the city landmark, which is the Heritage Orchard. And so the land is city land and it is under the jurisdiction of Parks and Recreation Department. So this is an endeavor where I will be working very closely with Manny Hernandez, the director, as we go forward. Next slide, please. So clearly you're all aware of this, but many people are not aware that the Heritage Orchard is part of a state point of historical interest. So our local historical assets are on the visibility at the state level. The History Museum has a long track record of maintaining and providing programming for the appreciation of the heritage of this general area. So the J. Gilbert Smith House is considered a city landmark, as well as the Heritage Orchard. The orchardist, J. Gilbert Smith, started planting these trees in 1901. And so although the trees provide structure, they're not a structure in the same way as a building. And so that is why they are a part of this point of historical interest. And so the historical record on these trees were that there were 444 trees. We did an inventory last year and are in the process of doing another inventory now. And there are only about a third of those sites actually contain living productive trees. So part of the restoration initiative, we have on order 300 new trees of the same blended variety that will be arriving for planting in the winter. Next slide, please. So I tried to make this relevant to your objectives. So the talk will be organized according to that. So first of all, a collaboration between the Commission and the Los Altos History Museum. Some of the aspects of collaborating and cooperating on documentation of the historical events leading up to protection of this land. Comment on developmental activities on historic properties, and then promoting awareness of the city's history and heritage. So these are your objectives, and I'll try to make relevant to those. Okay, next slide, please. So the museum collaboration includes 3 items. I'll tell you a little bit about the Orchard Commons Committee, and then about our new orchardist who the museum has contracted with to actually be doing the work. And then also how I will be drafting an orchard master plan that will provide the overview of what are the acts that need to be done in order to restore this. And also we'll be giving you the annual updates on how we are complying with the expectations. Next slide, please. So some details on the Orchard Commons Community. Again, we are within the Los Altos History Museum. It was formed in 2019 as a forum to discuss practices, and we include 3 types of perspectives. So those of experts, stakeholders, and the educators. And you may recognize that Larry Lang is a member of the Orchard Commons Committee. And so he's kind of your point person as far as the coordination of communication between the commission and the care of this landmark. Next slide, please. Our new orchardist is named Terrence Welch. His company is Orchardscapes. And so again, the museum has contracted with him to do this work. He comes to us with over 45 years of local experience with fruit trees. He's a certified arborist. He's got us on track to be able to certify the orchard as organic. Wouldn't that be exciting? He's got experience both with garden landscapes and also commercial orchards. Our renovations, our restorations will be somehow a blend between those two, because it's a very unique thing to have a commercial or a working productive orchard in a civic center. Next slide, please. So the Orchard Master Plan will lay out what are the expectations for this whole list of items that need to be taken care of throughout the year. And so, you know, just as you have a list as far as keeping an historic structure up to date, this is the list of things that we need to do in order to keep the orchard. It is a living library, really. And so these are all the things that we will be working on. And you can ask me about details later, but I won't go over that now. Next. Okay, the next thing then is collaborating with you in terms of historical documentation about the protected status of this landmark. And so we do have in the archives at the museum a timeline of events leading up to the protection. And we will be keeping a digital archive of the documents, both past and present, because actually this is living history. The restoration of this landmark It's not going to be going back to the same way that J. Gilbert Smith cared for the orchard because he used flood irrigation. There are no longer the groundwater resources to be able to do that. And so we are just starting with a pilot program for drip irrigation that will save water and make the trees healthier. Next slide, please. So this land has been protected as a working landscape for 122 years. It's been productive for that amount of time. As I mentioned, it was first planted in 1901. And in 1954, when the city fathers decided that they needed a civic center, they came to J. Gilbert Smith and said, would you be willing to sell us your land? He thought about it. He said, only on one condition, that you promise to keep it a working orchard in perpetuity, because he wanted the next generation of children to have that experience of picking that sweet Blenheim apricot kissed by the sun. And so that's our goal. So in 81, it was designated a historic landmark. 87 was the California Point of Historical Interest. And in 1991, the landmark boundaries were defined. Next slide, please. So this is a diagram of the boundaries of the orchard. Just to orient you, it's City Hall, library there, San Antonio Road along the bottom. And so this is the area that we are working within. Now, there are some improvements to the buildings in the Civic Center that are in the process of being done. Next, please. Haha, it showed up, the animation showed up. So that red dot there is the extension of the patio for employees from City Hall. I'll have a few comments to make about that. And then next, please. There also has been a patio put in near the entrance, near the walkway going from City Hall to what is now the annex, formerly the youth center. Next slide, or next, yeah. So in the library is in the process now of developing a plan for an outdoor reading area, which will be at the back door of the library. So there will be a 6,000-foot patio put in there. And so I'm on the working group as a part of that process. And we've worked it out so that there would be no net loss of tree sites currently in the conceptual stage. Now, the conceptual plan will be presented to the Planning Commission in November. So I just came from one of those working group meetings this morning. And so that will be a time for public comment. And we don't really know what the footprint will be until that. But I do want to commend and thank the city and the planning office for recognizing the value of the historic asset that is the orchard, and finding a way to be able to protect the orchard and to provide what it's a wonderful gift that ends up being a $2 million development. Next, please. And so there will also be a revision of the what was the youth center, but is now the City Hall annex. Telling me I need to speed up. Okay, next, please. So there are some concerns about the potential construction impacts, not the actual construction itself, but the staging area for construction. So these are some pictures of what happened with the City Hall patio area that was put in. The trees, there was no tree protection plan put in. So the workers were parking in the orchard, and they basically disposed of debris from the diggings, construction debris in the orchard itself. And so those are the kinds of things that, we need to kind of be thinking about as we move forward on this. And so it will really emphasizes the need for tree protection plans associated with the next two construction events that will be going on. Next, please. Okay, and then finally, promoting awareness. So that's two aspects, signage and then the educational programs. So these two signs the museum worked with the commission in developing those signs in 2019. Sean was an integral part of that. The historic orchard sign actually will be displaced with the patio plan as it comes in. And here we have some of our green teams and our adult volunteers proudly showing off a banner that we put up to announce the second phase of restoration of the orchard at this sign that has the plaques for the historical aspect there. So we will be planning on coming back to the commission with some plans for signage in a year. The construction on the library patio will probably not begin until a year from now, and so that will give us time to think things through. And then the educational programs, we're looking to provide multicultural and multi-generational program. Next, please. So the bottom line is to restore the beauty of the orchard so it is indeed a matter of civic pride by the 75th anniversary. Some of you remember this historic photo when it was so exciting to at least get a sign that said, designated this as a historic orchard. Next, please. The community connection includes both the joy of getting the apricots at DeMartini's. People come and paint in the orchard. It's also included educational events, historical tours. Next, please. And so how are we going to get to this point? We think of it in terms of two stages. First, the stewardship, which is actually getting the orchard so that it is in good shape. Next. And the second stage will be the education and appreciation. So we kind of think of it as setting the table and then figuring out who to invite and what kind of parties. And so the stewardship is going to be driven by that orchard master plan. And so I would, like to invite folks in the commission to think about what would be the process of seeking comment on that draft and finalizing for approval and those sorts of things. And it will be revised annually so that we can adjust as things turn out differently than expected. And then as far as education and appreciation, we have 4 themes that people have been telling me are things that they appreciate about this asset. One is the opportunity for community science, for inquiry. So we have green teams who've been doing science projects there. Certainly eating local is a big one, and juicy apricots. Heirloom beauty. People tell me they want more flowers in the orchard, and Heart's Delight. So evoking the pleasures that are associated with the value of Heart's Delight, picnicking, family activities, that kind of thing. Next, please. And so these don't have to be over the entire orchard. So the concept is that each one of those 4 interest groups would be represented in a different portion of the orchard. Our highest priority is going to be showcasing that heirloom beauty along San Antonio. Get it really looking beautiful. So as people whiz by, they say, oh, yes. Next. So in summary, collaboration with the museum will be through the Orchard Commons Committee, who is contracting with Orchardscapes to do the work. In terms of collecting historical documents, the museum has and will expand a digital archive in terms of the timeline for protection of the heritage orchard. In terms of comment on development activities, I've shown you the pending projects, and we will be pushing for tree protection plans for the ones that are still to come. And then in terms of promoting awareness of heritage, it will be the signage and the educational program. So that concludes my presentation.
Any questions?
Yes, so just out of point of curiosity, what is the expected life of a orchard apricot?
It varies quite a bit. We have some of I call them the grandmas, that are probably 60 years old. And this is a very unusual orchard because we have trees of all ages. We have the grandmas, we have the moms, and we have the babies. And so usually in a commercial orchard, all of them would be cut down probably at about 30 to 40 years. I talk with people in the community who say that they have an apricot in their yard that they know is older than 60 years old. So it depends on how well you take care of it. And that's the important thing. I'm so glad that we have a really experienced orchardist now. And he's telling me, no, when you planted those babies that died last winter, you didn't do it right. They really need to be babies. They need compost. They need more water. And so I'm very positive about looking forward to how things will turn around.
Are they, is the species consistent? Are they all Blenheims?
They are all Blenheims, and that is the historical nature of it, because that was the variety that was planted, because at the time those plantings went in, they had no way of being able to process them other than dry. And so the Blenheims are very sweet. They make a very sweet dried fruit. But they are an heirloom variety now because they do not pack and ship well. And so that's why one of the reasons that I think it's important we talk about heirloom is that, you know, this is it's essentially a genetic library. And it's important to keep some of those genetic information at hand to adapt to whatever climate changes may come in the future.
They're one of the best tasting apricots I've ever had.
Oh, definitely.
Yes.
They're awesome.
Well, they were actually developed in France near Paris at an orchard area there. And so they're also known as royals.
Do you have I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was just curious, with all the dumping that went on into the soil, do you have a hazmat problem or at least
I have no way of testing or knowing, and I think that's part of the issue.
so is that can be looked at in?
No.
Okay.
No, we're just gonna do the best we can to, get the soil to improve the soil with compost, and we'll be putting in the drip irrigation lines along there. And I've got the green teams helping me pick up the clods of dirt. Taking place. Yeah, that's an easy, yeah.
Maybe for the benefit, help me learn about this, maybe for the benefit of the others, you could say a little bit about the adaptive planning approach, which particularly
Yes.
for our living resources.
Yes, yes. And so my background is actually in conservation biology. And so it's really hard when you go to protect, to start a conservation project that's influences the lives of local communities. It's hard to know how things are going to turn out. And so rather than making a plan, and you got to stick with this plan, the approach is to set the goals as far as you see it at the beginning of the year. Pick out what are the solutions, the tools that you'll use to meet those goals. And then at the end of the year, evaluate, did I meet my goal? If not, why not? What do I need to change up? And so that's what the Orchard Commons Committee will be working together as a process, representing those three different perspectives. We got to have the experts in there, but we also have to have the folks that interface with the property owner and with the stakeholders who are going to be enjoying using the asset.
I gotta say, from what I've read about Gilbert Smith, it's not like he'd be dragging his feet about new techniques. He was pretty innovative in his own way, and I bet he'd be fine with the drip irrigation. He'd be out there wondering how it all worked.
Well, they say that he was the first one to have a tractor in the area. Yeah. So, and just FYI, we even talking with a local company that's kind of a startup to put dendrometers that are sensors on the trees that will tell us when they're thirsty and when they need that drip irrigation, so that we can really fine tune precision delivery of water. And that will also help. You've seen that some of the trees have died. They have those brown leaves, and that's due to 4 types of fungus that we have in the orchard. So most likely that was made worse by our atmospheric rivers this last winter with all the rain and the cold, and fungus it expands when you have those kind of conditions. And so if you give less water more often, that is supposed to help to be able to at least address the fungus problem.
being a very experienced cot cutter from my youth.
Oh, great.
I wish every child here could have the experience of the smell
Yes.
of cutting cots
Yes.
and laying them out in the trays.
Yes.
And it has stayed with me for Lord knows how many years at this
Yes,
point.
Yes.
And
And so we have folks that actually provide young people at the Apricot STEM Fair with that experience. So Bernard Lilly does that. And, you know, I don't know that we're going to be able to dry on site, but there are a number of people within our community that do provide the drying. And so, you know, some of the things, the ideas that people are kicking around for that central area where our focus is on local foods is inviting young people to have those experiences and also to cook up the jam cots, you know, that are falling on the ground in solar cookers, you know? So we can combine the new technology with the old heritage, the things that touch our hearts.
you just got to get that stickiness. That's just it's so germane.
It does, it sticks with you.
Well, thank you very much for checking in.
Thank you for your interest.
Look forward to future reports. I'm already getting people commenting, excited about seeing the work started over there, so that's great. Thank you very much for that. All right, do any of the commissioners have either reports or comments of things going on or ideas for future agenda items?
I wanted to discuss how we might promote, positive history of Los Altos, and thinking about it very specifically, looking at the applications for the Mills Act. I think that the actual point at which we could do this is if we could encourage our real estate agents to have a history of the title changes that is part of the package that new homeowners get. So that you could find out if you buy a home in Los Altos, there would be an expectation that, oh, here's who owned the house 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when it was transferred, perhaps having a history of when changes were made to the property, so that you'd have a list of all the and this is probably wouldn't take an awful lot of effort, but it would be a nice thing to have that would in fact promote consciousness of history. And I don't see any downside to this at all. If you're not interested in it, you're not interested in it, that's fine. You'll probably just file it away and pass it on to the next homeowner after when you sell. But I think it's fascinating looking at your package for Hawthorne. And to see exactly who owned the house, what was going on when the house was built. Having information about the architect and the builder, if that information is available. So, and I think that the way to do it is to work with the real estate agents in town here. And suggest it to them, and they wouldn't have to do it. But I don't need to be negative about it, but if they were encouraged, it's a positive thing. It'd be a real contribution.
Coincidentally, there's a meeting of the board of the Los Altos History Museum tomorrow, and which I'll also be sharing. And there are a number of his real estate agents on that board, so I will convey that idea or text, see what kind of reaction I get. So I think it's an interesting idea. Certainly, I would find it interesting. I could think.
But I'm on this commission.
No. I just we don't have any real estate people here, so
No,
so
exactly.
that's the way where I can.
Yeah,
I know
it'll be an additional expense that nominal in the scope of what properties cost.
It's an interesting idea. Thank you.
I do have a couple little questions. One, if there was a building on your property that was, it's not technically an ADU because ADUs didn't exist back in the 1950s, but the building is there, can the owners go back and have that building considered as an ADU?
Can you, what is the question again?
So at least, I know on my property, my father-in-law built a house and used it as his office, but it's the same size as an ADU. As,
Can't convert them, yes.
it's
Commonly done,
it can
yeah.
be converted. Then the other question I have is, if a building on a property was a business back in the 20s or 30s, would that fall under Mills, or would that fall under the Williams Act?
Williamson Act?
Yeah.
That's, Williamson Act is for, it's similar to the Mills Act. Mills Act is based off of it. But that's for agriculture. And that's not as commonly used because the state used to provide reimbursement for property tax reduction, and they eliminated the reimbursement a number of years ago. So it's not common to have Williamson Act contracts any longer. They still exist and they're still being utilized, the previous ones, but the state removed funding.
That's gonna make a difference.
Yes, it does. And Mills has never had funding from the state, so.
That's,
Did you want to?
I have one little quick item. In the days before the pandemic shut down, there had been some discussions about, doing an HRI update. And I'm wondering if, with the commission, you have thoughts on that?
I have a response for you.
Okay.
I received a response, so I answered, okay. So I was advised, this is the city's current take on it, is that the city is currently not proceeding with an HRI update. However, our general plan requires an update. There will be in the immediate future a comprehensive general plan update, which will be forthcoming, and as part of that process, there will be an update to the HRI. So right now, the big lift is the housing element implementation. So that's going to be a period of time as they update the code to respond to the action items within the housing element, and then they'll be able to move along to the general plan. But it's probably a period of time off, but that is the next step. So the general plan is rather dated. It needs to be updated.
and the housing element is a part of the general plan. Is that correct?
Correct, but the housing element has to be updated every 7 years. There's a section within the code regarding architecture and historic preservation too. So that whole section will need to be updated, and with that, then they will need to do a comprehensive historic resource evaluation of the city. Right now, it's been limited, 97 and 2013, 2008, it's been limited in certain areas of the city, not the entire city. So that'll be something that potentially will come back to you once they start the general plan update.
But certainly it's understandable that given everything else going on with the housing element. That's
Yes, and we were just speaking about it. I mean, it could be upwards of at least $200,000 for an HRI update potentially. Now we can potentially pursue certified local government grants. We can contact Office of Historic Preservation to see what that would be, but it is still quite expensive.
Yeah, and I think in the meantime, there's nothing preventing formal conversations with residents, encouraging them to participate, because that doesn't really burden the city very much at all, and leads to these kind of great engagements. And so we can talk it up in the meantime.
When I was approached by a member of the populace citizenry that in questioning about Halsey House, and what is the status? What is it?
Maybe you could say a few words of that.
Well,
Because I think it's up at the city council level and they have a whole study going on.
Yeah, I mean, I know things, but I don't know if they've made a determination on it.
Is somebody even talking about it?
They're talking about it. It's just, I think
At the council level?
I think it is at the council level, because I think as they evaluate rehabilitation, the cost is just continues to escalate.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of other factors that weren't a consideration that they're now looking at, and it is quite expensive for rehabilitation. So
But it's not I mean, I think it would be fair to say that the council authorized a study to take place, and that is going on now. And,
They're in process.
right, it's in process
Yeah.
now, right? So,
The study is in process or the authorization is in process.
I could speak to, I can ask more detailed questions of what I'm allowed to say, but I can find out for you and get back to you at the next meeting.
but there's stuff going on, for sure.
Okay. That's- I think that was the primary concern,
Yeah.
whether it was just.
It's fair, and I will say. That it always bugs me a little bit when we say, well, we need to keep after the Mills Act people to maintain their properties. When by far, the worst offender in terms of maintaining historic properties is the city itself.
Yeah.
So it would be nice to get that resolved because it's a little bit hypocritical, I suppose, but. Anyway, but thank you for bringing it up. And thank you for listening to our public. That's good. If there's nothing else, I want to thank all the commissioners for spending the evening with us and the good questions, the good discussion. I think it was really good. Thank you for bringing forward the two good projects. Good luck to you both. Got a fan club here. Thank you, Dr. Packard, both for the presentation this evening and the leadership overall. We're looking forward to great things over there. And thank you, Mr. Gallegos, for all the hard work.
I have one more item.
Of course you do.
I am sorry, potential future agenda items.
Yeah.
We will be scheduling a historic commission meeting in October.
Okay,
The primary discussion will be a presentation from staff regarding the code changes.
okay,
Which is, as you're aware, has resulted in the reduction of the commission from 7 to 5. There's a series of other changes in the code. And then there is, I believe, an update to the commission handbook, which we'll be going over with you.
okay,
That's the primary reason for that meeting, unless we have some other project that comes in.
okay. Sounds good. Thank you for that. And thank you, as always, for the excellent preparation, all your answers this evening and for spending the evening with us.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Okay, thank you. Adjourn the meeting now.